Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we will be previewing Game Week 11. As always, I asked for your questions over on Twitter and YouTube community and you gave me your dilemmas, discussion points, things that you needed advice on, and as always I will break them down in long form, discuss them using stats, my gut feeling, as much insightful discussion as possible, and hopefully answer your questions to the best of my ability. If you are enjoying the content here on this channel, please do remember to like, comment and subscribe. But without further ado, let's get into today's video. So guys, before we jump into today's video, I just wanted to give a massive shout out to the legends over at OneFootball for sponsoring the videos on this channel for the foreseeable future. If you're new to this channel and you don't know who OneFootball are, they are a brilliant free football application which puts everything you could possibly need and more into a football app. It's great for FPL, it's great for football. You can keep up to date with live notifications, the live ticker. You can find out who's playing through the lineups, transfer news, injury news, whatever it is, OneFootball will have you covered. As you can see, there is a slightly new addition this week, which is, there is a QR code in the top corner. So if you're watching this on your laptop or your computer, you can scan the QR code, and in doing so, it will take you straight to the App Store and you can download the app that way, or you can just click the link in the description. If you do it one of those ways, you're not only getting the best free football app on the market, but you're also supporting the channel. If you do download OneFootball using the code or clicking the link in the description, let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. So guys, a very, very popular question this week is, what do we do with Mikel Antonio? And I sold him on my wildcard in Game Week 8, so this is not a problem I'm dealing with currently, but I wanted to do as much research as I possibly could into this to help you with your decision. So not only am I going to now discuss Antonio in depth, but I've also discussed in the next section some possible Antonio replacements. So if you own Antonio, stick with it. Even if you don't, it might be an interesting discussion point around Antonio anyway. So what I've decided to do is, rather than just look at Antonio's stats over the first 10 game weeks, which is what I normally do when I look at a player individually, I thought it would be interesting to do a 5-game by 5-game split and look at him from game week 1 to game week 5 and from game week 6 to game week 10, because there's a bit of talk about him potentially having dropped off. So I wanted to look, has he dropped off, and if so, how much, and should we be worried? And if you do own him, is it worrying enough for you to sell him? It is worth noting that he missed game week 5 due to suspension. So he was sent off in the Southampton game after 2 yellow cards, which meant he missed Man United in game week 5. So the first 5 games are actually only 4 games, whereas the final 5 he has played all 5. However, the statistics are per 90. So apart from actual goals and assists, the stats are per 90. So the difference in game time shouldn't affect it too much. So the first thing to note is the first 5 games for Antonio, from game week 1 to game week 5, they were ranked 4th for difficulty over the first 5 game weeks. So the Fantasy Football Fix website allows you to sort by attacking difficulty for a set of fixtures. So for the first 5 game weeks, West Ham had the 4th easiest fixtures. So that might explain why they had a pretty good start to the season. If you take away Manchester United, they were actually in the top 2 for fixtures over the first 4 game weeks. Newcastle, Leicester, Palace and Southampton. So I'm not saying that that's the only reason that West Ham did well in Antonio. He was absolutely electrifying in those first 4 games. However, the fixtures were great, and that's something to take into account. In comparison, the last 5 games, they have ranked 9th for attacking difficulty. So they had the 9th easiest fixtures. I would say that potentially they might have been even easier than they look. Leeds have been largely terrible. Brentford have got a decent defence, but Everton, Tottenham and Villa have all been pretty shaky at the back as well. So I wouldn't say that the last 5 games have been particularly difficult for West Ham, but they have certainly been more difficult than Newcastle, Palace, Leicester, Southampton. So something to take into account. What I would say, as I said, is that I don't think they're that different. Yes, you can see more green in the first 5 in comparison to the last 5, but in general, I think they're pretty similar. So I don't think we can attribute the fall off in stats just to the fixtures. So if we jump into the stats and compare his first 5 to the last 5, you can see straight away in the first 4 games, rather than the first 5 games, he had 9 attacking returns. That is more than 2 attacking returns per game, 6 goals and 3 assists. In comparison, in the last 5 games, he's only had 2 goals, 0 assists. I say only 2 goals, that's still pretty decent, but to go from having 9 returns in 4 games to 2 return in 5 games is pretty worrying. But as you know, on this channel, we don't just look at outright who scored points and who scored goals. We want to look at the underlying statistics, because underlying statistics are a much better gauge of how well a player's been performing and how well they may continue to perform in the future. So if we take a look at expected FPL points per 90, this is a metric which encompasses lots of different things that's present on the Fantasy Football Fix website, such as expected stats, big chances, touching the box. It combines a lot of things and spits out what the Fantasy Football Fix algorithm thinks that person should have scored FPL points wise over the set of game weeks. So over the first 5 game weeks, expected FPL points per 90 was 8.48, which is absolutely brilliant. It's dropped to 5.63, but what I would say is 5.63 is still very, very impressive. But that is almost 3 points per 90 lower than the first 5. So there is definitely a big drop off there, but you do still need to place this in the bigger picture of that is still pretty good 5.63. It places him above most strikers. And expected FPL points are often a lot lower in strikers because they get less, they don't get the point for the clean sheet and they get 1 less point for a goal. So you often see that midfielders will have higher expected FPL points than strikers. So there is definitely a drop off there. Non-penalty expected goals, there is a drop off once again, but it's not massive. 0.65 per 90 in the first 5 game weeks. And for the first 4, but I'll say the first 5 game weeks, and then 0.48 in the last 5 game weeks. So once again, it follows a similar trend of, yes, there's a drop-off, but that is still a really, really good non-penalty expected goal stat. In the next section, we'll discuss potential Antonio replacements. And as you'll see, as far as I know, that's better than pretty much everyone apart from 1 or 2 of the replacements. So that's still very impressive, 0.48. But once again, a drop of 0.17, you would say is substantial. That is a substantial drop-off for sure. Expected assists, virtually the same, 0.36 per 90 in the first 5, 0.3 per 90 in the second 5. So that's not very different. What I would say is that's incredibly good for a striker. He is very, very creative. It reminds me a bit of Tony in that sense. They're both quite physical strikers. They're both natural goal scorers, but they're also very, very creative and they'll look to slide in their teammates at any opportunity. And whereas West Ham have Ben Rama running off them, Brentford have Mbomo running off of Tony. So they have these attacking players in which the number 9s can feed. So those attacking stats are absolutely fantastic. This is a stark contrast. This is probably, for me, the biggest difference between the two. In the first 5 game weeks, he had 1.51 big chances per 90. A big chance and a half every single game. 0.6 big chances per 90 over the last 5. There is a clear drop-off in that, yes, he's still getting into some goal-scoring positions. Yes, he's still creating, but he isn't getting those clear-cut opportunities that he got in the first 4 or 5 game weeks. So that would worry me because whilst Antonio's a fantastic finisher and whilst his XG is still decent, it's the clear-cut chances that result in goals, and that's probably why he had 6 goals in the first 4 game weeks because he would have had around 6 big chances. So for me, that it's not worrying at all because 0.6 big chances per 90 is still all right, but that is a substantial drop-off. And then touches in the box is actually largely similar. What this does mean is that whilst he isn't getting big chances, he's still very much involved in the action and he's still in the right places. And if you look at the touch maps, they are largely similar. What I would say is he's dropping out to the right a little bit more recently, and he's also dropping a little bit deeper. You can see deep to the left, there's a few more touches. But largely speaking, still a lot of touches in the box, still getting into some good positions. The underlying stats are still pretty good. So if we're looking at these stats, please place in the bigger picture. His expected goal involvement per 90 over the last 5 game weeks is still 0.78. That is so impressive. So yes, there is a massive drop-off. Not massive, there is a substantial drop-off, I would say that. But the stats are still brilliant. And I think before you go and sell Antonio, you do need to consider the fact that he is an £8 million striker with an expected goal involvement of 0.78 per 90. The reason people are looking to sell him, I've got the fixtures up here. They've got Liverpool at home, Wolves away, City away, Brighton at home, Chelsea at home over the next 5 game weeks. I don't think you could arguably get 5 worse fixtures there. Even Wolves away is not a great fixture, but to play Liverpool, City, Brighton and Chelsea as the other 4, they are horrible, horrible fixtures. And it places them quite easily as having the hardest fixtures in the league by some distance. Even Watford don't have as difficult fixtures, and they've got Arsenal, United, Leicester, Chelsea and City. So I understand why people are looking to sell Antonio, because no matter who the player is, even the likes of Salah, like he can score against anyone, but you would try and back the player with the better fixtures. And you do need to chase the upside. And when you consider someone like Tony as Norwich and then Newcastle, I fully appreciate that you're looking to offload because of the fixtures. My big thing would be, how much do you expect Antonio's underlying stats to drop off with a more difficult fixtures? We've already seen a drop-off of an expected goal involvement of what is that? Just over 1 per game, down to about 0.78 expected goal involvement per 90. If you then expect that to drop off again and it gets to around a 0.4, 0.5 expected goal involvement per 90, then he is worth selling. But if you think he can maintain around that sort of 0.7, 0.8 expecting goal involvement per 90, he could be brilliant. And listen, West Ham score against pretty much everyone. They've got such a free-flowing attack. And when they do score, they continue to try and score. They don't stop at 1 or 2 goals. So I wouldn't expect West Ham to stop scoring at all, but you would expect their output to decrease, in which case Antonio's will probably decrease as well. So if you're just looking at the stats, of course you wouldn't sell Antonio. There's absolutely no reason to sell him. But when you take the fixtures into account, it does start to paint a picture where you think, could I potentially find some upside elsewhere? Could I potentially go for Harry Kane or Jamie Vardy and upgrade a little bit because they both have really, really nice fixtures coming up? Do I potentially go to someone like a Tony who's a lot cheaper? His stats aren't as good, but he's got better fixtures coming up. It's a really tricky one. I personally, unless you see a striker that you really, really, really want, or you desperately need to downgrade him to afford someone else, I'd hold Antonio, is my genuine opinion on it. I just think the stats are so good. I don't think there are that many viable options, as we'll discuss in the next section. So I would be tempted to hold. That being said, like I said, if you've got like a Kai Havertz in your team and Antonio, and you want to get Heung-min Son, and to do that, you have to downgrade Antonio to Tony and Havertz to Son. If you look at that in combination, Son and Tony versus Havertz and Antonio, I probably prefer the Son and Tony. So I don't mind downgrading him to get elsewhere, and I don't mind upgrading him, like I said, to get a Vardy or a Kane. But do realise that whilst he's had a drop-off in stats, they're still fantastic. But equally realise that Liverpool, Wolves, City, Brighton, Chelsea is a terrible fixture run. Lots of things to discuss. I'm not going to give you a definitive answer. I've said that I would probably hold him unless you really want someone. If you told me you're selling Antonio, I'd say fair enough. I sold him on my Game Week 8 wildcard, but I feel very, very fortunate that he didn't haul in both Game Week 9 and Game Week 10, considering how good his stats have been. Considering West Ham put 4 goals in Game Week 10, I feel very, very lucky that I've got away with that. And I'm not sure that I would sell him if I owned him personally, unless I was trying to get another player. So I'll stop rambling about that. Just my personal opinion on it. Let me know down below. If you own Antonio, are you selling? And if so, for who? Let's take a look at some possible alternatives. So, assuming you do want to sell Antonio, I'm going to go through some replacements now. This isn't just Antonio replacements. This is essentially a comparison of all of the best strikers, in my opinion, for the upcoming game weeks, or some that I think will be worth discussing. Of course, I can't discuss everyone, so what I've done is I've omitted the premium strikers. So here I'm not discussing Ronaldo, Kane, and Vardy. The reason for that is because this is mainly focused on Antonio replacements, and we're going to discuss Kane and Vardy in the captaincy selection, and also we're going to discuss Kane in another section as well. So I don't want to keep on discussing the same players over and over again. And Ronaldo, I think whilst he's a great option, I would target him from Game Week 15 onwards. So as such, I've focused on Aubameyang and under, so £10 million and under. And there are some players that aren't on this list that will probably be fantastic options that I haven't included. But again, I can't discuss absolutely everyone. So there are certain players like Iheanacho might be a great option. I'm just not sure on his minutes, etc. So these are the 9, I believe there's 9 players that I think could be great options up front, either to replace Antonio or just strikers in their own right. I focused on underlying stats, but the final column does have their fixture difficulty as decided by the Fantasy Football Fix algorithm. So first would mean that they have the best fixtures over the next 6 game weeks, and 20th would mean they have the worst fixtures over the next 6 game weeks. So ordered by price, as per other videos, as per other sections, the bright green stat means that it is the best stat out of this list here. So if it's bright green, it means they have the best stat out of this list here. If it is that slightly more faded green, they're second. If it's the even more faded green, it's sort of third, fourth-ish. So really, if they've got bright green for all the stats, it means they have the best stats in the league. So if we just glance at this, Firmino is clearly the best striker on this list based on underlying stats. Now, it is massively skewed by the fact that he scored a hat-trick. I think all 3 were tap-ins, or at least 2 of them were tap-ins from a couple of yards out. That massively skews those. All of those would have been an XG of sort of 0.7, 0.8. So that does massively skew the data. And he's also only played 369 minutes, which also skews the data because it's such a small sample size. So I'm not saying disregard those stats. Firmino tends to put up pretty good stats anyway, but do consider that historically, he doesn't tend to perform that well over long periods. He tends to have a flash in the pan, hot run of form, and then he'll drop off. So take that into account. But Firmino, and to some extent Gabriel Jesus there, you can see, have really, really good underlying stats. And I definitely think they're worth considering. Now, I waited until the Champions League games on Wednesday evening to record this. I'm recording this during, well, the lineups have been announced now, and both Firmino and Jesus have both been rested. You could say rested, you could say rotated. That's an example of the framing effect. I guess I've put that as they're rested. You could say they're potentially rotated and they're not first choice. depends which way you want to look at it. It tends to be that Mahrez is starting the Champions League games and Jesus starts the Premier League games. So for me, that would make me want to choose Jesus even more for the Prem. And Firmino, I don't think there's any clear logic as to when he's benched. I think Klopp just rotates Jota, Mane and Firmino. And I think Salah's going to play almost every minute because he's too good to drop at the moment. But that would mean for me then, I think that Firmino's likely to start this weekend against West Ham. Just my opinion on it. So they're two great options, but of course they're quite expensive. If you compare Aubameyang's stats to Firmino and Jesus, you would say that out of those, Firmino, I would probably rather Jesus and Firmino over Aubameyang. I know, for example, Late Riser brought in Aubameyang, but for me, that is a gut feeling call. That isn't supported by the stats. That's just supported by, I've just got a feeling Aubameyang's going to do well. Historically, his numbers are great, of course, but 0.45 expected goal involvement per 90 is just not that great. 0.37 expected goals per 90 does put him as one of the best on the list, but that's not like insanely good. I wouldn't look at that and go, wow, I've really got to bring him in. If you compare that to Firmino 0.73, which again is a very small sample size, that's the sort of stats you'd want to look at. Even Callum Wilson is higher at 0.44. So for me, it's not great enough to pay the £10 million. So if you own him, you definitely hold Aubameyang, but I'm not sure that I'd want to take the punt unless you're just a gut feeling kind of manager. However, Aubameyang has the third best fixtures in the league from an attacking perspective over the next 6 game weeks. Watford and Newcastle in the next 3 are of course really great. So if you're a gut feeling manager that likes nice fixtures and you want to take a punt, you could do worse than Aubameyang. Those sort of mid-priced Jimenez, Wilson and Watkins-ish strikers, for me, if you take everything and you look at them all in unison, I think Wilson's the one. He gets a lot of big chances, as you can see, 0.9 big chances per 90. His expected goal involvement's always pretty good at 0.44 here, but often it's above 0.5. However, his creative threat's always terrible, and this isn't even shocking. 0.01 isn't surprising for Wilson. It's always below 0.1 per 90. He doesn't create chances, he scores them, which is what you want from your striker, really. What I would say is that the stats aren't that great. And 0.45 expected goal involvement per 90s, just what you would expect from a striker. But the fixtures are starting to turn for Newcastle. And I think Wilson's playing for a spot in this new era, in this new Newcastle. So I expect him to continue to do well. Depending on who Newcastle appoint, that might change my opinion. It looks like Emery has decided he's going to stay at Villarreal. If they do bring in Eddie Howe, I'm not going to get into a discussion here about Eddie Howe and whether I think they should appoint him. He does tend to play some exciting football. I think at Bournemouth, he was known to try at least to play exciting football. And we saw the Wilson and Fraser double up under Eddie Howe at Bournemouth. So we know he can get the best out of Wilson. So I think you can see they've got the 6 best fixtures from an attacking perspective over the next 6 weeks. I really like the punt on Wilson. I would go as far as saying if I was to bring in a striker at the moment, I think Wilson might be top of my list. Decent underlying stats, consistently good no matter who he's playing for, no matter what the team is, no matter what is going on fixtures-wise. He holds the same sort of level of underlying statistics. And they've got pretty good fixtures coming up from game week 12 onwards. I think I'd be taking a punt on Callum Wilson. Watkins' stats are comparable, but the fixtures are pretty terrible, and Villa have been terrible. And that's something which I've not discussed in these stats here, is the actual team they're playing for. And for me, I'd rather back Newcastle than Villa at the moment. Tony is the talk of the town because Brentford have been good but not great in the last 2, but generally speaking this season they've been great. The fixtures with Norwich and Newcastle in the next 2 are fantastic. He's on penalties, he's talismanic. The stats are okay, and I think it's a nice downgrade to go from Antonio to a Tony, as I said in the Antonio to section, to then fund a Kane or to fund a Son, Rashford, Ronaldo, whoever it is. That downgrade can do a lot. You're saving almost 2 million there, so I understand it. I own Tony and I'm happy keeping him for the next 2, but the stats aren't really that promising. His non-penalty expected goal involvement per non-penalty expected goals per 90, is 0.15, which is shocking. That really is terrible for a number 9. It's by far and away the worst on this list. Like, that is really, really bad. That is very bad for Tony. He's not getting a lot of opportunities outside of penalties to score, which does worry me slightly. 0.27 expected assist per 90 puts him second on this list. So he's keeping his creativity that we saw in the Championship, but he is really struggling for expected goals per 90. I still think I might be tempted to take a punt just due to the fixtures. It's a bit similar to Aubameyang. The stats don't necessarily support this, but he's a good striker. He's performed well in the past. The fixtures are great, even better than Aubameyang. So I might be tempted. So based on the players we've discussed so far, fixtures-wise, stats-wise, Jesus and Firmino look really, really good, but they're, of course, more expensive, and they are, of course, minutes risks because they've got Mahrez on the right and they've got Jota rotate with Firmino. So if you're going for stats and stats, I'd go for Firmino and Jesus, sorry. If you're going for fixtures and a bit of gut feeling, I quite like Tony and Aubameyang. If you're going for a bit of everything, I quite like Ollie Watkins. Callum Wilson, apologies. Callum Wilson would be a combination of everything. The other two players that I've got on this list who are a little bit cheaper, the two cheapest players here, are Edouard and Hwang. Now, they've both got some things that are great, some things that are not so great. Hwang's got pretty decent underlying stats, but they are starting to slowly regress. And we saw this with Conor Gallagher earlier on in the year. Sometimes players burst onto the scene, they have the best stats in the league, and then they slowly start to fall. His stats are still really good for Hwang. 0.7 big chances per 90, 0.37 expected goals. That's good for 5.8 million, but they're slowly starting to fall off slightly. And I know a couple of Wolves fans have said that he still looks great, but he might not start every game. And I think the Bruno Lage comment was that whilst Hwang has been great, they choose who will start in those positions based on the opposition. So that might mean that he does get the odd bench in. I think he'll start the majority of minutes. Don't stress if you own him, but I'm not necessarily sure I'd be looking to bring him in, especially as their next 6 fixtures are ranked 15th in difficulty over the next 6. So I'd keep Hwang if I have him. I'm not necessarily sure I'd prioritise him. And I think Edouard is a massive punt as well. The fixtures are decent. They've got the 8th best in the league, but his underlying stats are arguably the worst here at 0.35 expected goal involvement per 90. So I don't mind both Edouard and Hwang, but I don't necessarily think I'd look to bring them in. So if I'm taking that in combination, all of it together, I like Callum Wilson. I think Callum Wilson would be my number one punt. Outside of Wilson, if you're looking at fixtures and gut feeling and just historical numbers, I quite like Tony and Aubameyang. If you're looking at just underlying stats, you've got to go for Jesus or Firmino, but do realise that they're both minutes risks, and Firmino in particular has been quite a small sample size that is massively skewed by a couple of massive big chances. Let me know down below, do you fancy any of these options? If you're replacing Antonio, do you already own any of them? What do you think about these statistics? Do you like Callum Wilson as much as I do from Game Week 12? I think he could be a great option. So guys, the first of kind of like 2 philosophical questions, I suppose. Well, they're not stats based. They're just more about what do you do in this scenario? How do I know how to react in this scenario? And one of the most popular questions this week was, should I go from Azpilicueta, Rudiger, Christensen to James and Chilwell? And there were a few others. Should I go from this player to this player? Something like Smith Rowe to Saka or Saka to Smith Rowe. And people want to know, when do you know whether it's a sideways move, or how do you know if it's going to be an upgrade? And by a sideways move, what we mean is it not wasting a transfer, but just moving from a player that performs a certain way to another player, normally from the same team that performs just as well. You really want to use your transfers to upgrade your team. Even if you've got 2 free transfers, you always want to try and optimize your points. And you don't just want to move sideways. The issue when you move sideways, if, for example, you went from someone like Rudiger to Azpilicueta, due to variance and the way things work, you often get bitten by that. It could be the week that you move, the player that you've got, especially if they're similar to the other one, start scoring, the one you've just moved away, and the one you moved to stop scoring. So we don't want to make sideways moves wherever possible. But I think sometimes we use the words a sideways move, and I don't necessarily think that's always accurate. So here are some things that I think about when I'm trying to work out, is it a sideways move or is it an actual upgrade? So the first thing is, what do the underlying statistics suggest? Is the new player that you're bringing in significantly outperforming your current player? And I don't just mean outperforming slightly, because if they're slightly outperforming, it could be that one game later, the player that you had that was slightly underperforming has one really good game and then they come up. So I really would want the player that I'm bringing in to be significantly overperforming. So if we're talking about Chelsea, I would say I've got the stats for Azpilicueta and Reece James in front of me. Actually, James's stats, they are better, quite a bit better than Azpilicueta, but I'm not sure that they're significantly better. However, you need to apply context to that. A lot of Azpilicueta's great stats, especially his expected assist, which is 0.23 per 90, a lot of that comes from playing at right wing back. Of course, now that Reece James is fully fit and playing well, most of Azpilicueta's minutes will probably be right centre-back. So if you take a look at his underlying stats from right centre-back, they're significantly less impressive. So in that case, I would say that, yeah, James is probably a significant upgrade if you look at the underlying statistics. If you're saying someone like Christensen or Rudiger to Reece James, or Christensen and Rudiger to Chilwell, then absolutely, the underlying statistics suggest that it is a massive upgrade. Because, yes, they both keep clean sheets, so they're playing for both teams. So by having just a Christensen or Rudiger, you are covering the clean sheet. But when you look at Reece James' stats, the majority of his expected FPL points is made up through attacking returns. His expected FPL points is so high, almost 9. It's such great goal threat and assist threat. So I would say that yes, if you're bringing in Reece James or Chilwell for Azpilicueta, Rudiger, Christensen, Thiago Silva, it is a significant upgrade. The second thing is, why do you think it's sideways? Why in your head is it sideways? Is it just because they play for the same team? In which case, it doesn't matter. Even if they're both going to get clean sheets, you're not bringing in a defender just for clean sheets. So consider why in your head it is a sideways move. Something like Christensen to Rudiger probably is a sideways move. Even with expected minutes taken into account, I'm not sure there is that much upside to that move. But something like an Azpilicueta to a James, there definitely is. So consider why you're thinking it's a sideways move and challenge that viewpoint that you have. The third is these moves need to be long-term. If you're moving, I say it's not sideways, but if you're moving from a defender in the same team to another defender in the same team, do not make that move if you think you're quite like knee-jerky and reactionary. If you're going to get really flustered by making that move and it backfiring, then don't make the move. If you're someone that's got Azpilicueta and you're looking to move to Reece James, if you're someone that gets flustered by short-term being punished, don't do it, because there is every chance, I don't think so, but Azpilicueta could quite easily play ahead of Reece James in one of the next two fixtures at right wing back. Azpilicueta, as we know when he plays at right wing back, could do very well, and then Reece James can come on for a 1-point cameo and you can be like, I shouldn't have done that Azpilicueta to Reece James move. But you're not doing it for 1 or 2 game weeks. You're making this move with long-term in mind. So I would say do not make a move from one defender or even one midfielder to another midfielder of the same team or of a similar sort of like sideways-ish move if you are someone that gets flustered by the events going your way after not going your way after 1 week. Hopefully I made myself clear there. I felt like I rambled a little bit. So I would make sure that you're making it with long-term in mind. Because in my opinion, without a doubt, over the next 10 weeks, Reece James will outscore Rudiger, Azpilicueta and Christensen. In my opinion. That's just my opinion. So I would make that move. But I would make that move with 10 game weeks in mind. If you're asking me, will Reece James outscore Azpilicueta, Rudiger and Christensen over the next 2 game weeks? Who knows? With variance, the whole point of variance is that over a small sample size, over the next 2 game weeks, anything could happen. It could bounce off the back of Rudiger's head and go in for a 15-pointer, and Reece James could get a yellow card and score 5 points. Anything can happen over a short period, but over the long term, you expect the players to start performing in line with their underlying statistics, in which case Reece James and Ben Chilwell should outperform their centre-backs. Hopefully that helped a little bit. These are just some of the things that I'm thinking, but I want to snap people out of the mindset that you can't move from a Chelsea centre-back to a Chelsea fullback, because in my opinion, the Chelsea fullbacks will outscore the centre-backs. But over the short term, who knows? Like I said, Rudiger could score this weekend. Christensen could score 2 this weekend. But over the long term, I would expect the fullbacks to outscore them. So hopefully that helps for those of you that wanted to know, should you move from a Chelsea centre-back to a Chelsea fullback this week? This is definitely the big one this week. Heung-min Son versus Harry Kane. With the news that Antonio Conte has now joined and become manager for Spurs, this is the big discussion point. We've spoken about for so long now on this channel in the FPL community. Spurs have those great 4 fixtures from game week 12 to game week 15. We're going to want one of them as a potential captaincy option. Who do we go for? And we've been eyeing up both of them all season. And generally speaking, it's looked like Heung-min Son is the one. He's looked confident. Kane has looked devoid of interest. Everything, interest, enthusiasm, technical ability, even at points he's missing things that Kane wouldn't normally miss. He just doesn't look like he wants to be at Spurs anymore. However, we're still going to have to debate this week, and there are more things to consider than just stats and just whether one looks good or the other. I highly, highly urge you to, I assume most of my viewers watch it anyway, but if you do not watch the FPL Wire with Zof, Big Man Bakar and Late Riser, they are 3 of the best managers in the FPL community. They have such insightful discussions, and Zof is actually a Chelsea fan, and he did a fantastic analysis of how Spurs might line up under Conte and what this might mean for Son and Harry Kane and all of their roles, etc. So go and watch their latest video, because I'm not going to go into that much detail on Conte and how Spurs will line up under him, but Zof absolutely smashes that. So please go watch that. But we expect Spurs to line up in a 3-5-2. We expect them to play Harry Kane and Son up top. I'm recording this obviously before their Europa League conference game, so potentially we'll see what formation he's preferring, but hopefully we might, I don't know if Son and Kane are going to travel to that game. Oh, I think it's at home actually. So we might see Son and Kane in that game, but it will give us an indication of what sort of formation, but I'm pretty sure it'll be in a 3-5-2, in which case Son then goes up top with Kane, and we've once again got an OOP Son. Now, we know Son does perform well up top. However, a lot of the stats for Son as a striker are actually without Kane in the team. So I'll be interested to see with them both up front how well Son performs. And I think he could be a great option. And we might actually see an increase in his stats as well. Fixtures-wise, I'm not going to discuss them in too much detail because we know they're great. Everton isn't a bad fixture. So if you want to move early this week, I don't hate that at all. I already own Harry Kane, so I'm not too eager to get Son in as well this week, but I'm happy to own Kane this week. And then I'm looking at potentially doubling up with Son from next week. But if you don't own either, you've got 2 free transfers and you've got some money in the bank, I don't mind going for either of these guys. The benefit of not moving now is you get an extra week of information. Right, let's look at the stats then. Let's look at the stats. So, as I said, before we actually get into the stats, there are a couple of things to note. Son's stats, I think, will improve because he'll go from playing really wide left the majority of the time or wide right to a striker up top with Harry Kane. And again, they mentioned it on the FPL but I think it was Lautaro Martinez from last season played really, really well as like a secondary striker alongside Romelu Lukaku, and Son will play that role. And Conte knows how to get the best out of that secondary striker, and I think Kane will drop deep a lot of the time, and it will allow Son to run in behind. So when we're looking at Son's stats, I think we might actually see an even further improvement in the coming game weeks with Conte in charge. However, I also think we'll see an improvement in Kane's stats. I spoke about in my team selection video, we have natural tendencies as human beings, going back to the psychology. We want to present ourselves in an optimal light in front of new people. It's an evolutionary tendency. We cannot hide it. When we meet someone new, we like puff up our chest and we try and portray ourselves in the perfect light. We try and talk about our success and show that we're a successful, confident person. When we're on a date for the first time, we put in extra effort. There are all these things we do. And when Harry Kane sees Conte walk through the door as a world-class manager, he's going to want to show he's a world-class player. And at the moment, I'm not convinced that anyone's going to want to go for Harry Kane in January. If that's the case, he should look at Conte coming in, Spurs just outside the top 4, and say, I might have a chance at winning a trophy here this season with Spurs. So in my opinion, we might see a different beast over the next few weeks in Harry Kane. I think there could be a complete switch in the way that he plays, not only tactically, but mentally and physically as well. So keep an eye on it. That's just my gut feeling. Again, that isn't backed up by the stats. But what I therefore think is that for different reasons, Heung-min Son and Harry Kane will both see an increase in stats in the coming weeks due to the fixtures, due to the changes in roles, due to the new manager bounce, whatever it is. I think both of these could improve. Total minutes played so far, they've both played basically the same amount of minutes, an extra 50 minutes for Heung-min Son in comparison to Kane, but largely a similar amount of minutes. So it's not that we've got working with a small sample size for one of them. Projected points-wise over the next 6 game weeks, the Fantasy Football Fix algorithm slightly prefers Heung-min Son. Due to that being such a small difference, I'd suggest that that's probably due to the extra point for goals for Son and the extra point for clean sheets for Son as well, which of course is very important. But in projected points, that tends to boost the midfielders slightly higher than the attackers. Expected FPL points per 90 is actually pretty terrible for Harry Kane at 3.96. That is pretty rough. It's 5.52 for Son, which is good, but even that's not fantastic. So for both of them, this sort of displays what we already knew, that Spurs have had a pretty tough start to the season. And not with respect to fixtures, the fixtures have been all right, but with respect to the fact that Spurs just haven't really got going under Nuno. But of course, it's difficult to look at stats when they're now going to change formation and they've got easier fixtures. But I'm just going off of what we know already. Non-penalty expected goals and expected assists, again, isn't great for either of them, both below 0.5, which, if you consider that Reece James's expected goal involvement per 90 is 0.58, Heung-min Son and Harry Kane are showing lower goal involvement, that expected goal involvement than Reece James. So neither of them great. What I would say is that Harry Kane in particular has shown frightening consistencies in his expected goals over the last 5 or 6 seasons. Almost every season he hits an expected goals per 90 of 0.6. Not expected goal involvement, that's just purely goal threat, expected goals. So I would expect with relative confidence that this expected goal involvement for Kane will shoot up dramatically over the coming weeks. I also, as I said, expect Son's to shoot up as well, but they've both shown better consistency than this in the past years. And I do think I can put down a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it to Nuno. And I think Conte will get the best out of these two as a partnership up top. Big chances per 90. Son comes out on top once again. In fact, Son comes out on top on every single stat here. 0.68 per 90 for Son, 0.49 per 90 for Harry Kane. Neither of those are bad, but again, neither of those I'm particularly excited by. The fact that Son's getting 0.68 big chances per 90 when a lot of the games this season, not all of them, but a lot he's played out wide, on the left, quite wide, and then on the right, I'd actually expect that to maybe increase even further, and that is pretty promising for Son owners and prospective Son owners as well. Touches in the box for both is relatively poor, and once again, it's less touches in the box than Reece James. Reece James is a right wing back. He should not be having more touches in the box than Heung-min Son and Harry Kane. So that worries me slightly as well, that neither of them are getting into the box a lot. There was a fantastic quote, I think they read it on the FPL Wire, I might have heard it somewhere else, where Conte said that if he ever had Harry Kane, I think it was after like a World Cup game where he wrote, a Euros game. He said if he ever had Harry Kane, he wouldn't let him outside the penalty area. He said that he'd put him in the penalty area because that's where he's devastating. That's where he can do the damage. So hopefully, Conte will look at these sorts of stats and say, Kane's not getting into the box anywhere near enough. And whilst I think his natural tendency, Kane, will be to drop deep and allow Son to run in behind, as we saw with like Lukaku and Martinez last season for Inter, I do think that Kane will still get into the box a little bit more. And I think Conte will try and install that into him to get into the box and get into those opportunities where he can score goals. Listen, there's so much hypothesizing going into this now. And that's why I said if you can get away with just maybe rolling a transfer this week and going for Son or Kane the week after, I don't mind that at all. I think you get an extra week of information. Then you can find out, do you want Son? Do you want Kane? Everton is a good fixture. It's not a red fixture by any means. They look really, really poor at the moment, Everton. But over the season, Everton's defensive stats has been all right. But they've had such easy fixtures. So I think this is actually a pretty decent fixture. And so I don't blame you if you move early. But there are definitely benefits to moving late or waiting a week. My final point on this, again, is what they sell on the FPL Wire is that I personally would probably just go for the one that best suits my structure. If you can get to Son in one move without ripping up your team, I would do that. If you can get to Kane in one move, perhaps you've got Ronaldo or you've got Vardy and you can just get to him pretty quickly, or you've got Antonio and some money in the bank, I'd maybe just go for Harry Kane then. I don't think there's enough to split the two of them that would make me want to desperately go for one over the other. Son's underlying stats have definitely been better, but I just think that Conte is going to get quite a lot out of Kane. And I just don't think that you can necessarily draw too many conclusions from these stats when they're going to be playing in a different formation with really easy fixtures against probably low block teams, which might support Harry Kane slightly better. I'm just not necessarily sure you can draw that many conclusions from it. So I would probably just go for the player that best suits my structure, in my opinion. As I said, I own Harry Kane and I'm looking to get in Son because I think if you can get the double up, you're laughing because you've got both bases covered. And if Spurs do explode, which I do expect to happen, I don't know if it'll be straight away, but over these 4 fixtures, I expect quite a few goals. And then you've got the double up, you're going to be in a much better position than most people. Let me know down below. Are you team Son? Are you team Kane? Do you already own one of them or are you looking to bring them in this week? And if so, who are you looking to bring in? Right, guys, this is one of my favorite parts of these Game Week preview videos. I know a lot of you like the captaincy analysis as well. And I think unlike last week where it was basically Salah, I think this week, due to him just getting the assist, I think a lot of us are recovering from what happened in Game Week 9 and we're thinking maybe we can start to captain other people at some point. Now, we shouldn't let last week detract from the fact that he is still the best player in world football at the moment, Salah. He still performed really well in that game. He's still got an attacking return. And I don't want us to be clouded by the fact that just because he didn't score 25 points last week, it means he's suddenly a bad player. But I do think that there are going to be weeks to go against Salah. And I think this is potentially a week to do so. And we're going to discuss why now. As always, we follow the same sort of format. So if you're new to this channel, I'll just quickly explain it. Sorry for those of you that aren't new to the channel. In the top box, we've got the underlying statistics per 90 for the first 10 game weeks. And if the color of the box is like a bright green, it means it is the best stat of the options. If it is sort of that faded green, then it's the second. And then if it's that very faded green, it's sort of third, fourth. And then if it's white, it's fourth, fifth. It's not a very scientific way to do it, but it's just to give it. So when you glance at it, if they've got all bright green for their name, it means they are the best of that bunch for that underlying statistic. The box just to the left of me, just there, is the team statistics. So the first 4 columns with the dark grey box at the top, they are the underlying statistics of the attacking team. So as you can see, for Liverpool, they are the underlying stats for Liverpool for the first 10 game weeks. And then the next 4 columns with the orange box for the headings, that is the underlying statistics of the team they're playing against. So as you can see, Liverpool playing against West Ham. So the 4 columns at the end are West Ham's defensive underlying stats. Hopefully that's clear. And then in brackets, it is where they are in the league for that stat. So as you can see, for goals per 90 for Liverpool, they rank first in the league. They have scored the most goals per 90. For West Ham, they have the 5th best defence in the league for goals conceded per 90 at 1.1. Hopefully that's clear. So as always, we're going to start with the underlying stats for the players. The 5 best captaincy options this week, in my opinion, are Salah, Reece James, Jamie Vardy, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and Heung-min Son. Just my opinion on it, I'd like to choose 5 every week. Salah's going to be in there every week, and then I tend to choose 4 others. This is a mixture of underlying stats, fixtures, etc. Mainly focusing on fixtures, but also underlying stats. And let me know down below if you think I've missed off anyone. There are certainly some other options. I think Ivan Toney is someone that might have been worth discussing, but his underlying stats are just, they're not that great. As we discussed in the budget or the strikers section for replacements for Antonio, Tony's stats are all right, but I don't think they're good enough for me to want to captain him personally. So it would be these 5 for me. Listen, Salah's stats are amazing. As you can see, for every single underlying statistic, apart from expected FPL points per 90, he is the best out of these 5. He's the best in the league for pretty much every underlying stats. There are certain things like chances created and expected assists that he's not quite top, but on most goal threat stats, he does rank first. Goals per 90, 1, assists per 90, 0.7, touches in the box per 90. This is what always gets me. He has 9.2 touches in the box per 90. His non-penalty expected goals and expected assists sits at around 1 quite consistently. So he's expected to get an FPL return every game. And that's what we like about him. Not just how explosive he is, but he's so consistent as well. Interestingly, and he is a defender. I just want to make that clear. Yes, he plays in like a sort of midfield role, I guess. But Reece James, out of the other 4 options, arguably has the best underlying statistics from a goal threat perspective, which is remarkable for me. 0.98 goals per 90 is fantastic. Assist per 90 at 0.49 puts him second. Touches in the box. He has more touches in the box than Aubameyang and Son. Almost as many as Vardy. Where he does lack is his non-penalty expected goal is actually only 0.24. I say only. That's very good for a fullback or a wingback. That's higher than Ben Chilwell. So he's still got great goal threat. But if you're comparing that to like a Salah, Salah's got almost triple the expected goals per 90 of Reece James. His expected assist per 90 is almost as good as Salah's at 0.34, which puts him second on this list. That puts his expected goal involvement per 90 above Vardy, above Aubameyang, and above Son. It puts it above most other players in the league. Yes, he's only played 368 minutes, but that is still remarkable. Because of the clean sheets and the extra points for goals and not for assists, for clean sheets and goals, that puts his expected FPL points per 90 at 8.87, which is higher than Salah. He is 100% a captaincy option this week, Reece James. The only thing that slightly puts us off is even though he was rested in the Champions League, you still have that niggling doubt that Tuchel might rest him. He shouldn't. He really shouldn't. He's playing so well. He got a full rest in the Champions League. Azpilicueta played. I think Azpilicueta will drop into right centre-back in this game, in which case Reece James should start at right wing-back. But you have that fear. And the issue with James in comparison to Chilwell is if he is rotated, he'll probably come on for a 1-pointer. And then you're looking at your captain getting 2 points with Salah facing West Ham. And then you're really worried. So I genuinely mean this. I'm considering it based on their underlying stats. So out of the other 3 options, based on the underlying stats, I would go for probably just about Vardy over the other 2. Son's underlyings aren't great at all, and we saw it in the earlier section. Kane's are even worse. And yes, I expect them to have a new manager bounce, but I think I would rather wait and see how they perform against Everton and then see the Leeds game. And Aubameyang's stats are average at best. They're pretty subpar from what you want from a captaincy, in my opinion anyway. So that's the underlying stats. Definitely Salah, of course. Reece James putting up some frightening stats for a wing-back and even pretty good for an attacker as well. And then Vardy, I would say, probably got the 3rd best stats there. The team stats follow just a perfect trend. Liverpool are first in every underlying stat from an attacking perspective over the first 10 game weeks. They're first for goals per 90. They're first for expected goals per 90. First for shots in the box and first for big chances. Their stats are so good. Even against Brighton, they still maintain pretty decent stats despite not winning the game. Chelsea are, I would argue, probably the 3rd best attack in the league at the moment. Man City are probably the 2nd best. So Chelsea ranks 2nd for goals per 90, 6th for non-penalty expected goals per 90, 6th for shots in the box, and 4th for big chances. So they are one of the best in attacks in the league. There is no doubt about that. But I wouldn't say they're quite 2nd best. I'd say City are just slightly better. And Leicester are probably the 3rd best on the list here. They rank sort of, you'd say like a Europa League place-ish for expected goals per 90 and goals per 90. And shots in the box, they're 13th, but they're still pretty good at 7.5 shots in the box per 90. So Leicester have a decent enough attack. I wouldn't be worried about captaining a Leicester player because of their attack. I think they're likely to score goals. They're likely to get opportunities. But if you compare their stats to the likes of Liverpool, there is no competition. And then Arsenal, sort of a mid-table attack so far this season. This is taking into account those 3 games at the start of the season where they really struggled. More recently, you definitely have them in the top half of the table. So I'm not sure that I trust Arsenal's attack enough to captain Aubameyang personally. If you look at the fact that underlying stats-wise, Aubameyang's are average-ish and Arsenal's underlying stats are average-ish, it starts to put you off a potential captaincy for the likes of Smith Rowe, Saka and Aubameyang. And then Spurs are just horrific. 19th for goals per 90, 16th in the league for non-penalty expected goals per 90, 19th for shots in the box and 15th for big chances. they're around sort of like Norwich, Newcastle, Burnley stats for attacking threat. They are terrible. So this completely puts me off Son and Kane. I know this is under Nuno and they've got a new manager now. I think I want to see the Everton game before I start captaining Spurs players. I probably even want to see the Leeds game as well. Unless Kane comes out and scores a hat-trick and looks unbelievable, I'd probably want to see the Leeds game as well before potentially captaining a Spurs player. So Liverpool, Salah's the player to back, Liverpool the team to back. It's going to sound like deja vu every week. Best stats for Salah, best stats for Liverpool. Outside of that, best stats for James, second best stats for Chelsea. And outside of that, third best underlying stats for Vardy and third best underlying stats for Leicester. So you can start to see the order based on what we've said so far on the captaincy options. However, that then starts to become a little bit mixed when we start to look at the fixtures, which is incredibly important for a captaincy. Straight away, you can see that the hardest fixture here is the West Ham fixture. And this really surprised me. I had it in my head because I often watch West Ham. They look a little bit open at the back sometimes. And they always seem to win games like 3-1, 4-1, 3-2. I had it in my head that West Ham weren't that great defensively. But looking at the stats, expected goals conceded, they're fourth in the league. They're the fourth best team per 90 over the first 10 game weeks. Shots in the box per 90. Conceded per 90, I should say. They're sort of mid-table, which isn't that great. But generally speaking, you're looking at them as definitely a top half team and probably in that sort of top 4, top 5 teams for underlying defensive data. So that puts me off Salah slightly. I would say that the other three, and then Everton, you can also see Everton's defensive stats are decent, but they've had the best defensive fixtures over the first 6 or 7 game weeks. They had really, really easy fixtures to start the season. And the last 3 fixtures or so, they've had terrible defensive data. I didn't want to look at too small of a sample size, but Everton have really been struggling recently. So do take that into account. But I think that would altogether, I just don't think Spurs are an option this week personally. The stats aren't great for Son and Kane. The stats aren't great for Spurs. And the stats are decent enough for Everton across the season for me to not want to target Everton this week. And I wouldn't want to target West Ham from a fixture perspective. The other 3 are all pretty terrible defences, if I'm being honest, and they're all pretty terrible in their own different areas. So as you can see, for goals conceded, Watford have conceded the most goals. Expected goals conceded, they're all pretty horrific, to be honest. Leeds and Watford slightly worse than Burnley, but all 3 are expected to concede quite a few goals. Shots in the box conceded, Burnley concede an absolute ton of shots in the box, which maybe starts to lean towards the Chilwell and James. They get into the box a fair amount, 4.89 touch in the box for James. So if you can get into the box and take a shot, it looks like Burnley concede quite a lot of shots in the box. And then expected clean sheets per 90, Watford have been pretty terrible, which suggests they might do well in a couple of games, but generally speaking, they've not been expected to keep that many clean sheets. The other thing to note is that West Ham and Everton are both away fixtures. I haven't done that much digging on whether home and away is back this season, but largely there tend to be more goals away at home, of course, and there tend to be less goals away from home. So that might put me off once again, the Everton fixture, and it might put me off once again, captaining Salah slightly. And you can see the 3 easier fixtures in... Oh, sorry, Leeds is away from home as well for Leicester. I do apologise. So that might maybe put me off Leeds, but Leeds have been so terrible anyway. I think it's pretty clear, as you would have known without me rambling on for 5 minutes about the fixtures, Burnley, Leeds and Watford are the fixtures to target. And I would argue that West Ham definitely isn't. And whilst Everton haven't been that great recently, I would still argue that maybe Everton isn't the fixture to target either. Cool. That's almost 12 minutes of talking about captaincy. What's my opinion on it then? I would still say that Salah is a very good captaincy option. Just due to the stats, the underlying stats for Salah, due to the underlying stats for Liverpool, I would still say that Salah's a decent option. West Ham's stats, whilst they are good, they aren't like mind-blowing. I wouldn't say they're like the best defence in the league by any means. It's not like Liverpool playing against City, but they are better than I thought, and it certainly made me question whether I want to captain Mo Salah this week. I think if I owned Jamie Vardy, I would strongly consider giving him the armband. His underlying stats are pretty good. Leicester's are pretty good as well. They rank, like I said, sort of like 7th for most of the underlying statistics. And Leeds are arguably the worst defence here if you look at all of the underlying stats, maybe just about Watford. I'd be very tempted to give Vardy the armband. I also think I might be willing to give a punt on Alba if I owned him, but I was quite hot on Alba as a captaincy option. I've been suggesting to a couple of people that own him that you might want to go for him, but looking at his underlying stats, looking at Arsenal's underlying stats, I'm slightly put off, even though Watford is a great fixture, which leaves Burnley. Like I said, Reece James has the 2nd best underlying stats here. Chelsea have the 2nd best underlying stats here. And Burnley ranking 14th, 13th, 20th and 16th for the 4 defensive stats we've looked at. I'm so tempted to captain James. He's currently got my Vice armband, but If I can get any inkling that he's starting and I'm feeling brave ahead of the deadline on Friday, I think I might captain Reece James. For me, I only own Salah and Reece James out of these. So it'll be Salah or Reece James. One will get the armband, one will get the vice. I don't know if I'm brave enough to captain James yet at the moment, which is, it goes against everything I say psychologically. You shouldn't dictate based on ownership. I don't actually truly think it's based on ownership. I think it's more based on the fact that Salah is that good. But I just think sometimes it's not even worth looking at the defensive data on the opposition because he is that good. He scored against City, Chelsea, United. He can score against anyone. So I wonder whether I'm just overcomplicating things by even looking at anyone else. Let me know down below out of all these options, or are you going completely rogue and going for like a Smith Rowe or an Ivan Toney? There are lots of different options this week. I hope that some people have the confidence to go for someone else. For me, if I'm looking at anyone else this week, it would be Reece James. Let's now take a quick look at the player touch maps, as you know I like to do for my top 3 captaincy options this week: Salah, Reece James, and Jamie Vardy. So just a quick update on the top 3 captaincy options touch maps, courtesy of Fantasy Football Fix. Salah's is actually developing in some sort of monster touch map. His touch map's always great, and we've spoken about in the past that season upon season it looks very, very similar. It's starting to become even better. Like, he's evolving into a different creature altogether. He normally sticks right, and then he cuts inside, and it normally has that sort of red touch map in the top right corner of the box. He's drifting even more centrally now when he gets the ball. He's picking up the ball less so completely wide, and he's starting to pick up the ball centrally, not only inside the box, but just outside the box as well. So as you can see, if you look at Reece James's touch map, Salah's used to look a bit like that, but a little bit more central. But he's slowly drifting further and further centrally, and that's why he's picking up these incredible positions where he can score even more goals. And you can actually see that in his play quite a lot. He's picking up the ball in almost like a number 9 role. I don't know if that's just coincidence over the last few games or if that's something he's been working on. It's frightening, though. So like I said every week, his touch map's perfect. Jamie Vardy's it's the reason that it's so frustrating to own him. You can sum it up perfectly. The most touches he's had on the pitch is from kickoff. His head's just covering it, but the most touches in the box, the most touches on the pitch is all central, and it just shows that he doesn't take any touches in a game. He'll have like literally sometimes like under 10 touches in a game or 15 touches. He's he doesn't get very involved in the action. And in the 2-striker formation, he gets even less involved. Iheanacho does a lot of the groundwork. Iheanacho often gets on the ball a lot more than Vardy. And so I wonder what formation Leicester will line up in now. They switched to a 4-back at the weekend when they were really struggling. They looked significantly better. So I do wonder whether they'll go back to a 4-defender formation with Vardy up top alone. I'm really not sure at the moment. But either way, that touch map is the reason that I sometimes struggle to not only own Vardy, but captain him, because you can just have a game where he just doesn't touch the ball barely. Reece James' touch map is actually beautiful, isn't it? Look, he looks like a right mid or a right winger. Lots of touch in the box for a fullback. As we said, almost 5 touches in the box per 90. You can see on the sort of other side, he takes a lot of inverted corners. I don't know if he'll take a lot when Mount's on the pitch. I assume Mount will take most of those rather than Reece James having to run over to the other side of the pitch to take it. But generally speaking, that is an incredible touch map, even for a wing back. And it does excite me, and it still tempts me to captain Reece James a little bit. So just thought I'd just share them with you. Hopefully you enjoy looking at the touch maps as much as I do. I just think it's pretty cool to present on screen alongside some of the hardcore stats as well. So a question that I actually got from a couple of people this week was, how do we know when we're chasing points? And by that, they mean a player's been scoring well in previous weeks, Reece James, Ben Chilwell. Am I bringing them in just because they've scored well? How do I know that I'm going to not bring them in and then they're going to stop scoring? I want them to continue their run. Should I bring them in, or am I just chasing points? Should I look for the next big player, the next player that's going to start performing well? Because obviously Reece James isn't going to score 21 points each week, so should I bring him in? And it makes me laugh because I remember thinking back to last year, Jesse Lingard, and I avoided him completely because I felt like I was chasing points. He came in, he scored a couple of goals in consistent games, but his underlying statistics were terrible. And I thought, you know what, I'm chasing points by bringing him in. I'll look elsewhere. I'll try and be clever and bring in someone else. And he just continued to score. He continued to score. And it was really annoying. And the same happened with Calvert-Lewin last year. If you remember that really great streak he had at the start of the season, I didn't own him for that either. And I was really struggling with, I feel like he's going to stop eventually. Surely he's going to stop eventually. And I think sometimes we can be quite stubborn with that. So there is a bit of psychology behind it as well. But there is no definitive answer to this. This does not work every time. There will be points when you decide not to bring in a player because you think they're going to stop scoring points, and they will continue to score points. And equally, you will bring in a player and then they'll just stop scoring. Ben Rama is a great example of that from this season. A lot of people moved Ben Rama around game week 4 or 5, and pretty much his returns have dried up. He scored a couple of goals, got a couple of assists, but other than that, nothing in comparison to those first 4 game weeks. So here are some things that I think about to try and help me make this decision. But I'll be honest, it is a very difficult thing to know. And these are real people at the end of the day. These are real footballers. They are not robots. So even if everything points towards someone continuing something, anything can happen in football. So do take that into account. The first thing is, as per the previous sections, is what do the underlying statistics suggest? Are they overperforming? Are they underperforming? Generally speaking, if a player is massively overperforming their expected goal involvement or their expected stats, it will mean that generally speaking, usually their returns will start to diminish slightly. And what we say is they regress back to the mean, or they regress back to the level of their underlying statistics. And what that essentially means is they might have they might have been lucky, or they might have finished very, very well in one of those games. And as such, it probably won't continue in future ones. So again, Lingard completely debunked this last year because his underlying stats were average at best, but he continued to score. So there are some people, Heung-min Son always overperforms his expected goals because he's a great finisher. So there are certain players that will overperform their expected stats naturally, but it is a good test. So for example, one of the main reasons that I'm potentially considering not bringing in Ben Chilwell this week is if you look at his underlying stats, his expected goals, they're not actually that great. And he potentially either finished really well, which I think he has, or been slightly lucky to get the 3 goals that he's got so far in the Prem. So that's one thing for me. If I'm looking, am I bringing a player just because they scored well? I look at their underlying statistics rather than just how many points they've scored. The second thing is, how is the team performing? Especially for a defender in particular. Do the team look like they're going to continue keeping clean sheets? It's difficult, but not impossible to continue to perform consistently in a team that's struggling. We've seen players like Callum Wilson at Newcastle. They can continue to perform pretty well even when the team's not performing that well. So there are certain talismanic players that can, but generally speaking, someone like an Ismail Assar, he looked great, but Watford aren't a team that will score tons of goals. And as such, I don't think that Assar will consistently score points. And that's why I didn't go for him at any point, because I just couldn't see those keeping up, because not only were his underlying statistics average at best, Watford's underlying statistics were terrible. And they didn't look like a team that would score that many goals, despite putting 5 goals past Everton. So these are the things that I'm looking at. And like I said, especially for a defender, if the team's got really poor underlying defensive stats, but the defender's scoring loads of goals and keeping clean sheets, you've got to think, is that likely to continue? If they've got poor attacking underlying stats, but they've scored goals, and the team isn't likely to continue keeping that many clean sheets, I probably wouldn't move for a player like that. The third thing is, are they coming towards the end of a good fixture run? Or are they still in it? Or are they about to start one? Because often a player will score a lot of points, such as, again, Reece James and Ben Chilwell, because they've just been in a really nice fixture run. Are you bringing them in at the end of a good fixture run? In which case, you can't really complain if they then go on to struggle. And that's another reason I'm struggling with the Ben Chilwell decision this week, because I've already got Reece James, and I'm thinking their fixture run for Chelsea is starting to slow down now. Should I look elsewhere? Should I be looking for the next Ben Chilwell and Reece James? So try and look at the fixtures. Fixtures don't mean everything, but for me, fixtures are king a lot of the time. And as I've said before, fixtures breed form. A team that isn't in form but goes into a nice fixture swing will often then be the team in form by the end of those fixtures. So if you're 50-50 on someone and they're coming towards the end of a fixture run, maybe give it a miss and maybe look elsewhere. If they're still in the middle of like Lingard last year, I could have brought him in because West Ham's fixtures were still pretty good. Whilst his underlying stats weren't great, the fixtures continue to be quite nice. So maybe I should have seen the red light there and gone, well, he's clearly overperforming his stats, but he looks like he's finishing well. He's high in confidence. The fixtures are still good. Maybe I'll bring him in. The fourth is assess the context. And this won't pop up in the stats at any point, but is there a new manager? As with Spurs, are they playing for a starting spot? Potentially someone else is injured in their starting 11 and they're playing for a starting spot. Are they finally fully fit? There's no point looking at underlying stats from the first half of the season if they had a niggling groin injury throughout, and now they're finally fit. Maybe take into account their recent stats more so. So try and assess the context of which you're looking at. Like I said, Lingard had just moved to West Ham. He was on the absolute form of his life. He was so high on confidence. West Ham were attacking with a lot of fluency in their attack. So that was probably a sign that I should have potentially brought him in, even though the underlying stats weren't great. So you've almost got to weigh up the 4 and look at them in combination. Don't just look at underlying stats and go, the stats are terrible, they won't continue to perform. Look at everything all together. And again, the honest answer is we never know completely whether we're chasing points or not, but try and look at the entire picture rather than picking one thing. In psychology, it's a phenomenon or a bias known as the law of instrument, which is the over-reliance on one tool. We have this tendency, the law of instrument, to rely on one thing, and we make our decisions based on that. Don't just make your decisions based on expected stats. Don't just make your decisions based on fixtures. Try and take into account everything, and in that way, hopefully, more often than not, we'll know whether we've missed the boat on a player and we shouldn't bring them in, or whether they're still in this nice run and we should bring them in and just bite the bullet and realize we missed a few weeks of good points. Hopefully that helps you guys. Let me know down below, do you have any ways to find out whether you're chasing points, whether you've missed the boat, or whether you should look elsewhere? I'd be really interested to find out. That time in the video just to say a massive thank you to the legends that have decided to support the channel and to support me and become members of the channel. As you can see, the list is ever growing. Those with a green badge next to their name, it means they've been a member for over a month. So congratulations on our anniversary, and thank you very much for supporting the channel for an elongated period of time. And I appreciate you all very much. I know you don't have to do this. As I've always said, the content remains free forever, but I appreciate you all very much. If you are new to the channel or you are not currently a member and you want to know why people would even bother becoming a member, firstly, you're obviously supporting me and supporting the channel for all the hours of work I put in and the content I'm providing. But secondly, there are perks associated. So if you're a Raptor 2 member, the perk that you will get is you'll get a badge next to your name in comments and in live stream, and you'll also have some custom emojis as well, and you'll be supporting me. Raptor 1 members get to privately message me on Twitter via DM, and you're also entered into, number one, our group chat on Twitter, which has all of the people all here. We're all in a massive group chat together, chatting all day, every day about FPL and our teams and giving each other advice. And there's also a Raptor 1 mini league as well, so you can enter a mini league with all of us. And let me tell you, I think I'm like 6th or 7th in that mini league because there are some incredible ranks from our Raptor members. So if you want any of those perks, or you just want to support the channel, you can click the join button next to the subscribe button and become a member, or you can click the link in the description and become a member as well. There's no obligation to do so, but if you do, I obviously appreciate it very much. The content will always be free, as I always say, but I appreciate all of you guys so much for joining. You genuinely don't know how much it means to me. Thank you very much. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 11 preview. A very long one. Again, I haven't looked at the total time. We might have finally hit an hour. Who knows? I know you guys like these long form. I know some of you like wash up and cook dinner and just put me on in the background, just rambling away to myself. But listen, it's my style, it's my content, and I think you guys enjoy it. But if you do, let me know down below. I appreciate the support very much. If you do want to support the channel, you know you can like, comment, and subscribe. You can download OneFootball, which is a free app. So please consider doing that. Free for you guys, help support me. And if you want to go one step further, you can become a member of the channel, as we said in the last section, and you can buy my book, which is obviously in the poster behind me, and the links for the book is in the description as well. If you enjoy the psychological side of FPL and you enjoy trying to optimize your decision making and improve the way you approach FPL, then hopefully the book will help you to do that. So until next time, guys, which will of course be for Game Week 12, because I'm not streaming this week. The internet still hasn't been sorted, but I hope this answered as many of your questions as possible, guys. Until next time, thank you so much. Cheers. Bye-bye.